I managed it myself, the long-term rental, and I also handled the commercial properties up in Cheyenne for a while. And when COVID hit, I couldn't get a tenant in my condo. So at that point in time, I ended up hiring a full service management company for my long-term rental, which really isn't that cost effective, but I got a little taste of the hands-off piece of it.
Hi, I'm Wyatt. And I'm Grace. And you're listening to our dad and your host of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sean Moore, and I am excited. We've got our Friday interview day where we get to talk to short-term rental investors about their journey into short-term rental investing. Today, we've got Dave Leutscher and Jenny Lowe, and so thank you guys both for joining us. I'm excited to chat about your journey and how you guys got started and what you're doing in the short-term rental world.
Thanks for having us, Sean. We're excited to be here.
Absolutely. We got a chance to catch up live at one of our meetups recently in Denver. And so it was fun chatting. And so before we dive in, you guys know that I always like to get the backstory. I always like to hear kind of what pays the bills, where you're from, what got you interested in real estate investing in general, and then we'll dive into the short-term rental game. So let's start there. Let's talk about like what do we do for a living and what pays the bills and how do we get involved in real estate?
Sure. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Wyoming, and I pursued a degree in accounting at the University of Wyoming. The oil and gas company I still work for today recruited me from there. So I moved down to Denver and held a number of positions on the accounting team. And in 2020, I had the opportunity to transition to the back end of the accounting software as a finance system support analyst. So that's what currently pays some of our bills. But as far as real estate is concerned, my dad was really big into real estate, and he talked me into buying my first place when I was 23. So I lived there for a few years, and then when I was ready to upgrade and get into a different location, he, ever the influencing force, convinced me to keep that one and rent it. Fun fact, this is where Dave enters the scene because he was actually one of my tenants.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's how you met?
He still gives me crap about raising his rent. So
now it's on the flip side. Now I'm pro raising rent.
Right. Now you're all about it, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's a business move. He gets it now.
Yeah.
I've been in the long-term rental game since then, and I've always owned my primary residence. But my dad passed away pretty suddenly in 2016, and he left me and my siblings some commercial office buildings up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I have an older brother who has Down syndrome, and my sister wanted nothing to do with them. So I bought her portion out, and my brother was a silent partner, and I ran those for probably 5 or so years, and I hated every minute of it. So I ended up selling those ones. But his death it woke me up in a sense, and it kind of highlighted the fragility of life and got me thinking more about using assets as a way to help accomplish living instead of just something that's sitting in the back end. So that's kind of when I started dreaming about a place in the mountains, but I was really a little bit too timid to pursue anything in that arena. So with Dave's help, actually, that's when we sold that. We sold the long-term rental this year and converted into the short-term rental in Crested Butte. So in the grand scheme of things, he's what got me interested in the short-term rental game. Yeah. I kind of knew I wanted to be in the mountains, and I wanted to do something that I could enjoy and still make money because I knew investing was important for the future, but I just was a little stuck on how to get there. So
yeah. I'm originally from Chicago. Actually went to school for design and advertising. So different world. Moved out here in 2016, got into construction. So
landed himself a great place to live.
Yep, that's right. Best Craigslist ad I've ever responded to. So got into construction, kind of built a few buildings out here. Actually ended up in your neck of the woods. Built a hotel in Canyons Village in Park City. Okay. Kind of work sent me out there. So kind of did that, came back, have stayed in construction, but kind of played around with a few different pieces. Now I'm in the land development side. So, and honestly, like a big piece of that was after I got involved with Odyssey. Like once I started understanding a lot of the things that you guys teach about real estate, I got so hungry for I want to learn more. So it's been awesome. We jumped in and kind of get into it.
That's awesome. So when you guys, Jenny, when you were your dad was like a big influence as far as the real estate. And
For
then,
sure.
you know, with his sudden passing, you start to say, holy crap, this there is something to be said about having these assets and especially with your brother and, you know, like, you know, having some of that stuff stacked up is a big deal. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And you said you didn't like you actually had the ability and the opportunity, I guess I should say, of navigating a couple different asset classes, kind of see what you like, what you didn't like, you know, and it's interesting where your guys' paths are starting to cross, where you're the analytical numbers background and everything's, you know, and then Dave's this creative guy on the marketing and advertising side and understanding a lot of that stuff. And so it's interesting that it's kind of this perfect storm of like leading you down, which is, I would say short-term rentals are kind of the creative, you know, fun side of real estate investing too, right?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
It's funny because really, like, once we got into the program and really we're kind of going through everything and bought the place and we're going all out on it, it was like every podcast I listened to, every decision we're making, like I just kept like pinching myself and like I feel like all of my experiences and all her experiences were just kind of like bubbling up to, you know, like, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. But I think like 3 years ago, both of us would have been a little more timid, a little more like, nah, I don't know. But it felt like kind of like everything was happening. And, you know, this is number one. But I think with that confidence, it's like, oh, who knows like where we can go with it, which is awesome.
I think but we both take a little bit of time to we really think things through. But once we're ready to hit the gas, we hit the gas pretty fast. So that's kind of what happened in this arena too, for us on this one.
Well, and I think that, and tell me if I'm wrong. And, you know, like when it comes from like commercial or development deals or the long-term rentals, a lot of that really is strictly about the numbers, right? And then our side, we talk so much about we're in the experience business and we've got to create these amazing customer experiences and everything else. But at the end of the day, it still always comes down to the numbers, right? We still need to understand like that underwriting and the financial, like what kind of return we're going to be getting on this and why would we be doing this extra work? Because there's a lot more work involved in a short-term rental. And so I'm curious, you know, Jenny, especially from your point of view, from like that numbers analytical side of you, and you said, you know, Dave's kind of got you interested in the short-term rental world. Yeah. You know, was there any resistance saying, I don't know if this is just kind of you know, I don't necessarily want to play with my real estate investments. And this seems like or was it ever like that for you?
No, not necessarily. I knew, so I was kind of just burnt out on the landlord game, and I managed it myself, the long-term rental, and I also handled the commercial properties up in Cheyenne for a while. And when COVID hit, I couldn't get a tenant in my condo. So at that point in time, I ended up hiring a full service management company for my long-term rental, which really isn't that cost effective, but I got a little taste of the hands-off piece of it and really liked that. So my hesitancy, I knew real estate was a good investment, and I knew that I couldn't sell that long-term asset and not channel it into something else that was going to generate income. And I just didn't know how that was going to look ultimately. So I wasn't hesitant about that. My hesitancy was how much I wanted to be involved, because I was just a little burnt out at that point doing it by myself. So I was counting on this guy to be the workhorse behind it.
After she got me, you know, from being a landlord, she didn't care about anything else. So it was, you know, she got what she needed.
Best investment ever.
Exactly. After you landed Dave, you were like, okay, somebody else can take this over, right? I'm good.
I mean, at that point, I'd done background checks and credit checks, so I knew what he was about, right? So it's the best way it's better than maybe dating.
That's a really good. That's a really good way to vet out a future dating partner. And you're like, hey, listen, I'm just going to do a full background check.
Exactly.
There you go. Hey, lessons are learned in every podcast. There's one for all you ladies that are trying to do a little vetting on the guys that you're thinking about.
Right. No, so for me, it was purely a fear-based thing from the standpoint of like, just didn't even know where to start or how to do it or how I was going to manage it. My full-time job is a little demanding, and I'm co-guardian of my brother. So there's a little bit of care that goes on with that up in Cheyenne. And like, my day-to-day life is fairly busy. So the thought of taking on even more work, and that's partially why I sold those commercial properties up in Cheyenne, because I just didn't have it in me to give the attention that I needed to give them. And I knew I wasn't running a good business ultimately. I mean, it was still profitable, and I learned a lot of good lessons, but what I mainly learned is that I didn't want to be in that arena full time.
And I always say, because I think a lot of people assume that because we go all in on short-term rentals that I don't like other real estate asset classes. I've been full-time investing for 24 years, and I've navigated commercial development, fix and flips, long-term rentals, multifamily, a lot of different asset classes. And I always say they all have pros and cons, but I believe all of them are great investments. And it sounds like for you, they were still really good investments.
Mm-hmm.
You're just getting a little burned out, wanted a different, find a different asset that fit a little bit better for your lifestyle and what you were looking to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dave was really interested and excited about it. It's like, okay, well, we'll 1031 exchange this. You can do all the work, and I just want to be hands off. But I'm also a control freak, so it didn't pan out that way.
That's not how it worked. Yeah.
But it was nice knowing I had that option and could be involved as much as I wanted to be. So
it was great. I knew I had her support, and then I don't remember what episode it is. I could find it, but I sent it to her one day, and this is after I'm like halfway through the program, and she responds with all these really good questions. And I'm like, yes. She's in.
She's really thinking about this. It's not just on the surface now, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's navigate that. So you decided, did you decide to sell the property before you decided to jump in here?
On that,
because 1031s are very strategic, right?
Yeah, I think one, it started with the property goals, like you always talk about, right? Yeah. And I think, we knew we wanted a mountain place.
Well, it started out as mountain or beach. I knew I wanted to sell it and channel it into a vacation rental is ultimately it was. And that's been on my radar for a couple years now. But we set intentions this year that we were going to make it happen. And the tenant's lease was up in April. So I reached out to them and let them know I wasn't going to be renewing it because I was going to be selling the condo. And they ultimately ended up buying it, the people that were living in it. Right. So it moved a little bit faster than we were anticipating. But we were still ready because we decided at that point it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was awesome. And I listened to almost all the podcast episodes before I joined Odyssey. And I think that if anyone's listening that hasn't joined, I would recommend go doing that, because I think one thing that I always hear you say is it's not for everybody. I knew it was for me by episode 7, I was like, oh yes. And I just kept eating it up. And then when some of these things popped up, an earlier version of me would have been maybe not ready. I was already ready, and I was already thinking about things I hadn't thought about. And, again, you always say go do something, that'll send you down this path. Right. Listen to the podcast. There's so much good little things if you're picking up. And I think if you listen to them with the thought of, hey, I'm going to do this, then I think it changes the mindset of how you hear things.
And really all the information is in the podcast. We kind of debated, do we need to join? Because you pretty much give it all. And David consumed them at a rapid rate. But we ultimately decided the networking and the connections and the community was something that we really were seeking out with this.
Yeah. And to clarify that, once we did, I wouldn't have changed anything. I there is way more than it's just in the podcast, but you're not hiding anything, which we very much.
And I tell people that truly, we want people to walk into this with their eyes wide open. If we could take the whole master class and just throw it out there, it would just be overwhelming for people, right? There's a lot in there, but we've talked about almost every aspect of it, I believe, through podcasts and books and stuff like that, and different things that we put out there. But there is something about when you're, the execution of it and being around people that you can bounce ideas off, seeing other people that are doing it and understanding that, hey, listen, if I have a sticking point or I need some more clarification on something, is there a group of, of experts that are there to help? And I think that that's really what, and I, not just our coaching and mentorship program, really all of them, I spend a small fortune every year on coaches and mentors, and it's not for this, groundbreaking information that they're not willing to share, that these big secrets behind closed doors. It's not that. It's, hey, listen, if we're going to run down the road and we're going to execute this, I want to accelerate as much as possible. And I want to know that if I have a problem, there's somebody there that has actually been through that before, right? That has actually seen that problem and can help me navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So we got the 1031 exchange, and
Well, so they said they were going to buy it. We knew we wanted to be in the mountains. At that point, we had decided mountains before beach because we just spend more time in the mountains, and it holds a special place in our heart. So we were thinking the Summit County corridor, but it just didn't. It felt saturated. It didn't really speak to us. It kind of felt a little bit forced, and we had heard a lot about Crested Butte. So we booked a trip for Dave's birthday. Neither of us had been down there before, and we booked a ski trip for his birthday and decided that while we were down there, we would reach out to a real estate agent and start looking at some places. So we had a handful of places we looked at while we were down there. Didn't necessarily like any of them, but the last one we saw on the day we were leaving, we saw it on our way out of town. We actually fell in love with, and that's the one we ultimately ended up buying. And
yeah, I mean, I think just again, kind of going back to listen to the podcast, right? I had heard so many episodes and so many different stories, right? And, I, even looking back, like it seems easy because we've already done it. But like, when I think back to like, oh yeah, like even after we got into the course, there were a number of times where like, it was like, yes, we want a mountain place. Yes, we want it close to home. But what about Florida? What about, all these, you still have all that. Yeah. And it was like, just go down a road and chase it. If it doesn't feel right, then go to the next one. Right. And, one of the episodes I had just listened to was like the guy that had his property in the redwoods burned down twice. It's like, oh, I don't want that. And then, then like listening to like other, members talk about, if I were to do it again, or I have done it again, and I'm not doing a full construction project, right? Like I watched my dad do that, and he, spent 7 years redoing a house. It was amazing, but I was like, I don't want to spend that long. I don't want that much time. So, I think hearing all those things definitely helped us navigate that.
Yeah.
And then, really even the place we stayed in, we'd get back from skiing and it just wasn't a comfortable spot. Like the layout of the room, couldn't really hang out. And so all the other places we looked at kind of felt the same way, and then we went to this one place and it's got an amazing view, and that's what really sold us. And
it just felt good.
But the layout, I was like, this is a place I would want to come back after hanging out here in the summer or the winter. And I feel like this is where I want to be. And none of the other places felt like that. And then I think just hearing all the things that you guys teach, and then
we went down there for the inspection and stayed at a different place. And we realized then that there was kind of a little bit of a market that we could tap into. We wouldn't have to do a whole heck of a lot to set ourselves apart from like the existing options that were there.
The guy had like dishes in his dresser and a small fridge in the closet, and he was still making like $200.
I still can't believe this happens. I started this back in 2006. That happened a lot. There was a lot of that kind of stuff out there. Now I'm like, how are people still doing this? Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You said a few things that I think is important for people to hear, especially as they navigate this. And I think that you guys would agree, there's not ever a perfect property. There's never a perfect area, right? You're always going to have something that is like, oh man, well, we are buying in the mountains in Colorado, and what about wildfires? Well, I don't want that to happen. And there's always these things that we're like, well, maybe this is a better area. The grass always seems greener on the other side of the fence, right? But when you have really clear like property goals and what you really want, and that's why you guys hear me, and you hear me say it on podcasts a lot, but you hear me say it inside of our Vodacy family and our group is, go back to those property goals and use that as your North Star, your guiding light, because what do you really want out of this? And ultimately it started with, we wanted property in the mountains because it holds a special place in our heart, and we want to go there. And I also think that you touched on another thing is, when you identified a few properties that you wanted to go look at, and you go on that trip there and you stay there, and there's properties on paper that look probably that you had favorites, right? And then you go to them and they just weren't the right ones.
Right.
And then when you do find the right one, even though there's things that like I said, there's never a perfect property. A lot of times the right one, you do feel it has a good feeling. You're like, this is it, right? This is the one I want. And a lot of times we don't know that unless we go look at properties. And, I've been investing for 24 years. There's a lot of people who, teach that you can buy properties sight unseen, and they're really comfortable with that. I'm not a big fan. I've never personally bought a property without setting foot on that property before I closed on it. And because I've had so many times where I'm like, my favorite wasn't my favorite by the time I went and saw the property and stepped
for
foot in.
sure. Yeah.
No, I think one of the things that, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say, but I mean, I can't tell, listening to all the podcasts, I can't tell you how many times I heard you say the best time to buy real estate is, and I'm like, I've heard that before. It's not like, but I had to hear it about 25 times. Then I'm like, no, that's right. And now I finally get it. But, even with these, it's just, I don't know. I think.
So you found the one though that you guys liked, right?
Yeah.
And you said that was in that April, May timeframe. What was the time frame on that?
It was the end of February, beginning of March that we saw it and really liked it. And then we closed on it by the end of April.
Yeah, I mean, like that's
so you guys, because you knew your tenants were going to buy the property, so the lease was up. You knew you were going to sell it in April, but you had already arranged that like into that February timeframe. So it
kind of threw us into the fire. Because we started the conversation, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is real. We're doing this, and which was great, honestly.
Because they wanted to buy it, and my property manager at the time advised me to sell it while we were still under lease, just so like if it fell through, that I wouldn't have anything to lose at that point in time, because I was going to list it after so I wasn't even planning to list it for sale until the beginning of, I think May 1st is when I had originally planned. But when I found the tenant wanted it and it ended up working out, it kind of sped our timeline up a little bit.
So you guys saw that one March, closed at the, middle to end of April, sped it up a little bit. And then, so take me through that process then of actually, closing and going through that setup, because, it sounds like the acquisition phase went really pretty fast for you guys.
Yeah.
Like it was, that really was accelerated. And then
extremely fast.
My birthday's at the end of February. So we're there for that. First time we'd ever been to Crested Butte. I think we probably put in an offer 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter.
And we had the 1031 exchange going on. So we were doing a lot of digging. That's all her. She was awesome with that.
A lot of paperwork behind the scenes, but
got that
I excel at logistics.
and then, luckily the property we got had already kind of gone under contract twice and fallen through. And so
so we had, I was actually in Vegas when we closed. I did it early and I had to go for a work conference. So Dave had to go pick up the keys when I was out of town. And we had a goal of getting it on the market June 1st. And as you know, those timelines don't always shake out how they're supposed to shake out. We actually ended up going down there, 12 weekends, I think, just going down, turning around, coming back, and just driving back and forth. It's a 4-hour drive from Denver each way. So we went, I stayed back a couple weekends. We both stayed back one weekend to run a half marathon. We were training for a half marathon during the middle of that.
In the middle of all that, right?
Yeah.
Smart, real smart.
Yeah.
So we did that, and I stayed back a couple weekends. My brother came and stayed with me one, and I had a friend's birthday party or something, but Dave was there pretty much 11 out of the 12 weekends until we got it on the market. And he started a new job in the middle of it and didn't have as much flexibility. So there were times we'd get off at 6, we'd get on the road at 6 p.m. and get down there at 10 p.m. We'd have basically 36 hours to do whatever we could possibly do. And then we'd turn around and come back and work. And during the weeks and the evenings, we started ordering stuff to furnish it before we had even closed on it, because we knew, the logistics of getting it down there. It's not necessarily easy to get things delivered in Crested Butte. You don't have a street address. Most things are PO boxes, and certain things can get delivered there, but it's not the most reliable. So we ended up getting most of it delivered to our place. We'd stored it in the storage unit. Friday, we'd load it all up. We'd hit the road, and we'd get down there and we'd work on getting it up and running. And it was a lot of time in the car.
it was. And I think, again, that's where just listening to previous episodes and kind of stuff you teach really helped. I mean, I'd say that's probably where my construction background helped the most, because I'm dealing with subs all the time and understand timelines aren't what they tell you and all that stuff. And so we actually we knew we were going to rip out the countertops and redo those, and knew that was a long lead item. We ordered that and paid for that before we even owned the place.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a gamble. And at the same time, we had a really good feel with the realtor, who's awesome, Alex Richland.
But there was one of the highways that when we were getting countertops measured, we were waiting on somebody to come do it. And one of the bridges that was on the track to get to Crested Butte, they found a crack in it. So they closed down that path. So it ended up rerouting people 5 or 6 hours out of their way. So we had the measurement scheduled, but it then got delayed a week and then another week. So that June 1st was realistic in the beginning, but then there were things outside of our control that kind of pushed it back. It was honestly, in hindsight, it was a bit aggressive either way, but
right. Especially you guys were doing a lot of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think to your point too about property goals, I think we heard people stressed out on other conversations and stuff. And I think from the beginning, we kind of looked at each other and said, look, we know this is going to be stressful. There's going to be times where things aren't going to work out, and let's plan for that. Let's expect that. And when it happens, it won't be a big deal. And I can't tell you how having that mindset helped so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like countertops, like it was like, oh no, like, and you look at each other like, it's all right. We're expecting this. Yeah. And then like, I think the second to last weekend I was there, I had to do like 2 things, and one of them was rip out a sink and replace it. So, or not even. I was going to take it out for the countertops. Yeah. And it cracked when I pulled out. I was like, I can't buy one of these out here, But then again, it was like, okay, no problem. And we ended up liking that sink way better, and it's all fine.
Yeah.
But just having
I think you make a really good point of, like, it didn't make it any easier. What made it easier is that you didn't feel like we're the only ones that this is happening to. Like, what did we do wrong? Right.
For
like
sure.
Right in the beginning of a process, questioning yourself, like, holy crap, we screwed, like we made a huge mistake. Right. When know, so like when I say, that setup phase is exhausting, and it's hard, and you're like ready for like, it feels like you ran, multiple marathons, even though most of us don't actually fit a marathon in there or have a marathon in there. Right. but you feel like that. And, and I think that the important part of that is, like you said, you kind of walk into it knowing that there's a lot of, like, that's what it is, that it's a hard part of the process. And when you go through it, you're like, man, I can't wait for this part to end, right?
For sure.
Because the best laid plans always have these hiccups and their challenges, especially when you're dealing with any sort of rehab or contractors or deliveries and setup in areas that just really aren't set up for that stuff.
Well, the funny delivery story. So we ordered a mattress to be delivered down there, and it was supposed to be delivered on a Tuesday.
Don't worry, it's one of yours.
Nice. All right.
We had it delivered down there, and they were supposed to deliver it on a Tuesday. And I just I keep meticulous spreadsheets, and I'm always looking at things. So I happened to look at the tracking information on Monday, and I see a picture that they had delivered it on the side of the unit in a snowstorm. So there's just this box sitting there in a snowstorm. And I was like, this isn't even supposed to be there till tomorrow. So fortunately, we had already secured a property management company at that point, and they were able to go pick it up and store it for us until we got there. But there were just little things like that, I mean, it would have sat there all night if I hadn't looked. So, it's just like those types of things that crept up on us.
So you mentioned 12 weeks, right? Is that about, like, you were hoping to get June 1st, which would have put you at about, that would have been like more like a 6-week time frame, right?
We would, yeah.
So, which would have been a little aggressive, I think. But in hindsight, but
girl can dream, Sean.
I can appreciate that. Hey, listen, I'm a dreamer too. It's like I'm always going to shoot for the stars.
Right.
So we got it 12 weeks. What does that? Where does that put us in? Is that toward the end of July?
It was actually mid-July.
Okay.
July 12th, I think.
We stayed there for 4th of July, and then we went live the next weekend.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we ended up going down there 4th of July. That weekend was actually, there were some minimal touches and some pictures taking and stuff, but that was more of a fun trip. And we really got to connect a little bit more with the town and spend time at the parade and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. But then we listed, I think we put the listing out on a Friday, and it was I think you have to wait 24 hours with it to go live on Airbnb. So we put something out there just to get it moving. And it was, we were planning on revamping the actual verbiage for the listing, but it was rented out the next day. And we've since done some updates to it, but like it hit the ground running, and it hasn't been booked solid ever since, but there's been like a couple days here and there that it hasn't, but otherwise it's been.
That's like during the week. It's every weekend, and we've gotten plenty of like long stays. So we're thrilled with it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So good launch. So isn't it exciting? Like that first, like right when you launch, you're like sitting on pins and needles. Like, look, is this actually going to work? Right? Like, is this?
Well, it's a little nerve wracking too. And I would check reviews every day, but you have to have 3 for them to publish them, and the company at EQ have to leave reviews for them before you see the reviews they left you. So like I was on pins and needles a little bit. He's a little more go with the flow. It is what it is. And like I said, I'm a control freak, so I need to know.
I think really the review thing, I think got me a little bit too, because like we were getting the bookings, and I was like, all right, this is right. We're follow the process. We're doing it right. But the reviews didn't come in right away. Yeah. And, I think that, you're not going to get all of them, but it was just, it took maybe a week or 2 longer before we really started seeing any. We're like, but now they're rolling in, and it's confirmation.
How do you feel when you
got one the other day? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. How do you I love like reading the reviews that come in. Like I love seeing that people love what we put together. Like is that a fun part of the process for you guys at this stage now? After all that work, especially?
I take screenshots and send them to my friends and family, and like, we're the best. Not really, but it's good affirmation that all the hard work was worth it. And that, when you're in the midst of it and you're making some decisions, like, am I going overboard? Does this feel like overkill, or is this really necessary? Especially when you see the competition out there, but it's like, no, this feels right. And we basically looked at it as, what would we want if we went and stayed there? Like, what would be comfortable for us? What would make our stay more convenient? What would make it just feel good? And that's what we went off of, is that feel. So I think it paid off.
Yeah. I was doing plenty of art projects as I was doing construction projects and everything else to for some of the artwork, and give it a bit more of a cool look and feel. And, some of that stuff, first time I did some of that stuff, so it took a little longer. Mm-hmm. We got a review the other day, and the guy said, this is the best place I've ever stayed at for an Airbnb. And it's just awesome.
It's awesome. Doesn't it make it feels good? Like, there's validation there that, hey, listen, all that work, all that extra time and effort that we put in is, people are appreciating it. And that's at the end of the day, it's an investment. You're making money, you're getting the bookings.
Sure.
Like you said, the bookings were coming in, and you're still kind of like, well, what do people think about it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I want to know what they say, and those start to roll in then, and you're like, okay, this feels good.
Yeah.
Right?
Then there's a little bit of a sigh of relief, and like a little bit of relaxation takes place. It's like, oh, okay.
And I know that you were, Jenny, you're like long term, like I didn't want to manage these. You guys set it up with full service management, which is what I do with my portfolio as well.
For sure.
And I was on one of our coaching calls last week, and we had one of our members that just went through the acquisition and the setup and launched it with a property manager, a really good launch. And then she's like, I feel like I need to be doing something else. So I've been like going 90 miles an hour for the last month and a half, 2 months. And now I feel like, what do I do now? I'm like, how do you actually get to enjoy and look for the property number 2. So
right.
Do you ever feel like that, like right after that intense period? Like, did you guys go through that at all? What else should we be doing?
The first week after, because I kid you not, when I say Monday through Friday, we were ordering things, returning things, plotting, planning, and then taking it. We were busy nonstop. So that first week, we need to be doing something. I can't just sit here. Like, something needs to be done. But at that point in time, we had rolled it out and it was ready to go. So
and we quickly found some other stuff to get busy with too. Yeah. Through this whole process and through her kind of jumping on and supporting me, I very quickly realized this is the lady for me, if she's willing to go down this crazy road with me. And, if all I have to do is lead and she'll, come along and support, then
if it's reasonable, I'll follow.
Let's go. Yeah, I think so. We started talking about getting married, and we she knew it was coming, and I had the ring, and I kept trying to get her to go on a hike and propose, and she kept turning me down because it wasn't part of the
it wasn't part of the training plan.
Of the half marathon training schedule. She's very by the book in that regard, and I appreciated it. But because we were getting home on Sunday at like 9:00 at night after driving 4 hours, and then on Amazon and ordering all this stuff all week and just doing that, like, I was like, okay, where else am I going to propose?
Yeah.
Like, a hike's my only option. That's what I would rather do anyway. And then,
and our first date was a hike, and we just loved being out in the mountains. So it was a good option.
But eventually we got the race done. And then shortly after, I think it was like the second to last week, she finally said yes.
Yeah, I shot down the hikes.
Not easily. She almost said no. And I was like, no, we need to go.
I shut down the hikes for a few weeks after that. I was like, no, there's too much to do to get this property ready. We've got to get going with it. We don't have time to dilly.
You were shooting down the hike like you didn't know what he was going to say.
I had no idea. No.
Yeah, okay.
Like I knew it was coming, but it didn't make the connection. So
in the meantime, she's giving me crap that she's got naked fingers and that when are you going to make an honest woman of me? And I'm like, I can't say anything, but okay.
My troubles are of my own making.
Yeah.
So we're actually getting married next week.
September 9th in Telluride. So.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. So quick, like a quick engagement, marriage. So did you actually make the hike happen? Did you?
We did.
Did she get a ring on the hike?
It was on the side of Mount Crested Butte. So that place is still special to us because that's where we got engaged. But we're eloping down in Telluride because we love the mountains and it's just stunning and beautiful down there. So.
Oh, that's so awesome, you guys. Congratulations. That's
Thanks.
fun. So, Jenny, your last name is a lot easier than Dave's last name. So now you got to...
Dave's going to change his last name.
Yeah,
we're just going to change our last name to L.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome. What a fun like journey together to start everything, and what a fun like I love that.
So it's an exciting. I mean, that's what we're feeling. Once the place was on the market, we could focus our attention on getting married.
Getting married, starting life together officially, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats, you guys. That's really fun. That's it's not every podcast that we get to talk about the journey led to like an engagement and we're getting married. Right. Like that's awesome. It like in a week.
Lord turned future wife.
Yeah. Right. Well, at least you got the background check in the beginning, Jenny. Yeah. So you can make an educated decision there.
Smart businesswoman over here.
I wouldn't have gone out into the woods with him if I hadn't.
Right. That's awesome. Well, guys, this has been a really fun conversation for me. So I always appreciate you guys, any of our guests that come on, and I really appreciate you guys for coming on, sharing the journey, sharing the story. Kind of just, and letting people know they're listening. Hey, you're not alone. You're, when you have those struggles and that time that you're putting into it and everything else, like there's reasons for it, and everything's going to work out, and it's especially when you're following a process. And so these are really fun conversations for me. So one, I appreciate that, and two, congratulations on what's going to be happening in your lives in the next couple of weeks here, right? And so, but actually, probably so September 9th is the big day. And that is, I actually leave. I'll be leaving for Alaska right there. That's the day I leave for Alaska for a week. But those of you listening, they're probably already going to be married because this will probably air right after that. So, congrats, that's awesome. And so that'll be really fun. And so, because there's a lot of lessons learned here, and sometimes even starting with background checks and deciding how we're gonna navigate life with somebody, and it ultimately was a first tenet that we had there. Yeah. What are some of the pieces of advice if you could go back and say, hey, listen, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, I've gone through the process now myself. If I could go give myself some advice, and if I was starting over or starting from scratch, what would that be? So
I think for me, like with most things in life, and particularly in the short-term rental venture, like I would tell myself to walk by faith as opposed to fear, and to like focus more on the journey instead of just the destination. Like I've always been a very methodical and thorough person, and it was no different here. But when that June 1st launch date came and went, I started to get really anxious, and I started to get hyper-focused on that deadline, and it caused me a lot of unnecessary stress and robbed me, I think, of the fun and the joy that this process can have. Because ultimately we had done the we had crunched the numbers and we knew that financially we would be okay, even if we didn't get it rented for up to a year. So I think I was really hyper focused on, even though I had heard, there's something about hearing it and also internalizing it. But I'd heard deadlines aren't always going to be met. But I think I was a little bit too focused on that aspect of it instead of just kind of enjoying the process and being present for everything that happened.
Love it. Love it. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I'd say one, don't try to propose during this process. You get shut down.
It worked out for you. I mean, you might have got canceled on a couple of times, but you were persistent.
Yeah.
So that worked.
Persistent.
Yeah.
Be persistent.
No, I mean, even with us having a half marathon scheduled, it just, I think we're all always going to be busy in life, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we did a great job. We said no to a lot of things, which is how we could spend that much time there getting it ready. But I'd say if you have the opportunity, just plan for that and clear your schedule as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then, this is so dumb, and I don't actually know that it would have turned out better because there were so many things that we didn't like, brought back and reordered and stuff. But it didn't even really occur to me to take a week off of work. I really should have done that probably.
Yeah. Awesome. Love it. And I think it's great, great advice to say, listen, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to put some time in, maybe take some time off, but also you've got to fit life in as well in the middle of it. Right. And so give yourself some grace that, maybe that 6 weeks turns into 8 or 12, and that's okay. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then Jenny, I'm curious, have you read or listened to the book Outwitting the Devil?
I have not.
By Napoleon Hill. Okay, it's awesome. And those of you listening, if you haven't watched, I like to listen to it. So this is a book that was written by Napoleon Hill back in the 30s, and it didn't get published until 2011 because he felt like his family was going to get cursed. He feels it's a conversation with Napoleon Hill, after the Great Depression. He wrote Think and Grow Rich, and he felt like a fraud because he started losing money, and so he had this conversation, and he wrote it as a book, and he had this conversation with the devil, and got to ask the devil all these questions. And one of the things that he was saying is most people operate out of fear instead of out of faith. And so that faith and fear. So I was curious, but it's if you haven't listened to it, I like listening to it because there's two different characters. There's the devil character, and then there's Napoleon Hill. But it's also a book, and it's really interesting. So there's one for you, especially if that's that's on the radar there for you.
Well, we listen to audiobooks on those drives to Crested Butte, so we'll throw it on the list.
Throw it on there. It's a good one. I love it. It's one of I'm a huge fan of Napoleon Hill, and it's a really it's probably one of my favorite ones that he's written.
That's awesome. I actually just read the other one a month ago. Not even.
Did you? Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A great book as well. And I mean, kind of the original self-help, performance type book, and so with mindset. But go and those of you listening, go check out Outwitting the Devil. It's a really good. I like it. Like I said, is listen better than read. But and lots of good nuggets of, just things to pay attention to. And it's really interesting with what's going on in the world, and this was written back in the 30s and all the parallels to different things. I think you find it interesting. So on that note, you guys, so you got we covered a lot today. Covered a journey. We talked about an engagement, and then we're ultimately right on the heels of the actual wedding. We talked about how to screen our future mates.
Avoid dating. See, it's another plug for investments. You avoid dating websites. Just buy a rental property and get yourself a tenant.
We even have a book recommendation. So
right.
We're putting it all out there.
Podcast.
Exactly. Awesome, guys. Well, Jenny, Dave, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your guys' time. I know how much other people, I love these conversations so much myself. I learned so much as long as we've been in this game. Every journey has so many lessons, and it's really nice that you were able to share that and allow us to have this conversation on a podcast and let other people listen in. So appreciate it, and thank you for joining us. It's been a fun one for me.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those of you listening, you know, at the end of every episode, I always ask you a couple favors. But first, thank you for spending your time with us. We know how valuable it is. We know that you have other things you could be doing and you're spending it with us. So we hope you got value out of it. If you did get some value out of it, we don't run ads or sponsorships on the show. The only way the show grows is if you guys share it. So if you know other people that would like to be a part of these conversations, walk into the short-term rental game with their eyes wide open, share the show. Those things help us grow the show. And if you have more than 30 seconds, like it or review it on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. Those things also help us, and we very much appreciate that support and help on those platforms. And the final, most important thing that I ask you at the end of every episode, pick that one thing you can do today to start building that life you don't want to take vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website?
Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodacy.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.